Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel and this amazing series. I'm Aditya. In this video, we are going to see data binding, specifically binding our reactive variables to inputs or some other properties of HTML. So if I go to Svelte documentation, there you will see inside element directives, of course on Svelte docs, element directives, and then we have here some properties to bind. So we can bind it to a specific property of the HTML element. In this case, let's say we want to bind to the input, then we can bind it to the value of that input, or we can bind it to some, let's say if it was a video, then its duration, its buffered, or any other attributes. Or if we want to bind it to select, we bind it again to the value. So for input again, we can bind it to the value like this. So we can bind it to any or the most of the HTML elements property. Now we also have bind group and we also have bind this. So let's see this one by one. So let's start with the bind property. Now let's say we have an input element over here, which just let's say we take it as a placeholder where we ask for enter your name, and we want to bind some property to this so that when a user enters name, because generally when you have contact forms or login forms, you will need inputs where you want to associate them or you want to bind them to JavaScript variables so that you can send it to the server for further processing. So here we want to bind some variable. So how we are going to do that? Here we are going to take first a property, let's say let name, and by default we will give it, let's say, some initial name. We can keep this blank, that's not a problem, but let's just give it some name. Now to bind it, we just say here bind colon, and then over here we just pass in the property that we want to bind name. Now if we go back over here to our website, you will see that it has binded our reactive variable there. Now to make sure that whatever we change in our input reflects in our JavaScript, for that let's print that name over here like this. Now if we go back again over here, you'll see it's printed here. Now if I just edit anything here, there we go. So it is reflected on our JavaScript side as well, or in our JavaScript reactive variable as well, or in our Svelte variable, Svelte reactive variable. And if I also remove this and add it again, so everything works fine. That's great. Now what if we want to do this similar thing for select or some selector or some drop down where we have, let's say, a list or an option box to select a color, and we want to bind it to the property. So what we are going to do, we will take another property, let's say let color, and this time let's give it a blank value. Now here we can do the same thing. We will just say bind value, and this will be binded to color. Now to make sure that this is binded properly and we're picking the correct color, here let's display the value of that color. So if we go back again over here, now if we take red, there we go, we have the red value. Now here you will see that it takes this value and not the text value, because of course whatever is the option value, that becomes value of that selector or that select. So in this case we are selecting red, so it becomes red. If we select, let's say, some other color, let's go for green, then we have green. For blue, let's go back again there, and if we take it blank, and then goes over there. Now so far so for normal select and input type text or number, even for number it works the same. Even if you have text area, it works the same. So we can take just a quick example of a text area so that we can just see how it works. So here we can take a text area, so let's make it as a text area, and let's just remove these properties for now and put a value, and let's bind the name value again with this text area. So bind value, and here we'll bind the name value. Now of course we have binded it in two different locations, so of course if we change over here it will reflect also over here, but our purpose is to just see that if that binded value changes properly. So in this case, whatever we type over here, you will see it gets reflected over here. Perfect. Now how does it work in terms of checkbox? Because in checkbox we have, like, as when we are taking multiple options in checkbox, we are generally taking a list or an array from the user. So how does it work in terms of checkbox? So what we are going to do is, here we are taking options for shapes. So let's take a variable here, shapes, and let's define it as an array. Now when you are binding to more than one elements which have the, in this case, same attributes or relationship. In this case, they all refer to checkbox or shape. In that, or in these circumstances, or in the situations like this, you could use something like bind group. So in this case, we can use the property of bind group rather than using bind value, because if we use bind value, it will take only one value at a time. So we are going to say bind group, and here we will make it as a shapes like this, and then we just need to copy this and paste it to other two input checkbox. So here and here, perfect. And now if we want to let's say make sure that the like this shapes is binded correctly, we can print the list of shapes here. So we can say shapes.join and join it with a comma separated string. So we are just converting array to string. And if we go back over here, if we select circle, there we go, we have circle here. Square, we have square there. If we remove square, square goes off. Rectangle, there we have rectangle. If we remove circle now, so we have rectangle, square. So everything works fine. So bind group is generally useful if you are dealing with checkboxes or even radio buttons. Now, what is this bind this? So in this case, bind this is used to bind to an HTML element or to get that HTML element. Now in Vue, you might have ref. In React, you have useRef. In Svelte, we use bind this. So let's see an example of that. So here, let's say we take let input element equal to some null value, or we can just keep it like undefined value. And here we could say, now let's give this some ID so that we can see if we are getting the correct input. So here I'm going to say binded input element. Now if we want to get this HTML input element, we could say bind this, and then we need to pass input, sorry for that, input element. Now let's see what happens when we console this. So console.log input element, and if we go back over to our website and just see in the console, you will see it's undefined for now. But if we let's say do something like this, let's say we have a button over here, button, and we will see this on click directive as well, what it does. And here it says show element. Let's say it has this function, should be in the curly brackets. Oops, sorry for that. And show, and here we can just put this in a function of show element, function show element. And now if we go over here and just give it a try, so if we go back over here, let's remove this, and if we click show, you will see we get that input element. Now why it was undefined on first go, but we click the button, then it became like a proper input element. The reason being, we have defined it as undefined, and till it gets the value, like this input element variable gets the value of this actual input element, it takes some time, because of course this thing is not rendered yet, and then or not mounted on that component yet, it's not attached to this input element yet. So that's why we were getting undefined when we just put console.log over here. But now when we have something on a trigger or something after that input element is binded properly, then we can see its actual value. So this thing, when you want to get the HTML element, maybe you want to let's say in terms of like in the documentation, it has shown for canvas, which is a canvas HTML element. So for that, you might want to get the 2D context, you might want to have some other thing on that. So in scenarios like this, getting the HTML element is useful. Or let's say here you want to get this input element, and maybe you want to let's say get the ID of it and do something else with it, or get the data attribute of it, or you want this element to process somewhere or do something processing. In any case, if you need an HTML element, you could use bind this. Right now, if we go to the documentation again to bind this property over here, you will see that you can use this for components as well. So let's see what happens when we use bind this on a component. So let's bring in our title component because we already have a component for that. So title from title.svelte, and let's put that title component over here, and here we show element. So here we could do something like this, bind this, and let's say title element, and let's create another element here, title element, and here we could just show title element instead of input element. Now let's see what happens. So if we go back over here, if we hit show, you will see we get the components property, or the component like everything about that component. Now what if we want to bind a class to this button? For instance, let's say whatever color we select from here, we want to bind it to that button. Well, we can do it very simply. Here we can simply say class, and then we can have the color like this. And here, if we go back again, select a color, you will notice that okay, we selected blue, it becomes blue, it becomes red, it becomes red. Just need to make sure that we have those appropriate CSS classes mentioned here. But what if we just want to toggle a class? For instance, let's say when we select a color, we just want to show this button to have some active, like a class of active. So what we could do here is we could add whatever class we want to toggle, and like CSS class, and the variable which is dependent for this toggle to happen. For instance, if we select a color, we want to show it active. If the color is empty or null or undefined, this active class will be removed. So let's give it a try. So if I go over here, we should see the color of gray. If we select any color, let's go. There we go. If we go back again, there we go. So that works all fine. We can also make this shorthand by over here. So here we have defined the CSS classes. Let's say we don't want to define the CSS classes. How we can have the style of this changed based on the color we select? Well, here we could do something like this, style, and then background background equal to whatever color they select. Now in this case, let's go back over here. If we go back over here again, if we select, let's say red color, we have a red background. If we select blue, we have blue background. If we select green, we have green background. Just we need to make sure if we want to change a style property for that button or any HTML element, we just say style and then colon the property name and the dynamic or reactive value we want to add to it. So that's all in this video. In the next video, we'll continue with this series where we will see the concept of slots, and we will also see how we can have named slots or default slots and how we can have layouts. So all that we will see in the next video. Till the next time, goodbye.